All right, let's get right to it. We're talking about percents in section 5.2. And one of the things I want to start with is the idea that the word percent means per hundred. And that should make sense. There are 100 years in a century. There are 100 cents in a dollar. So, this sort of um, prefix, it's the back end of percent, but cent is going to tell us there's something going on with 100. As an example of that, if we look at a number like 42%, well, percent means per 100. So if we were to write that as a fraction, it would be 42 out of 100. Those two things are equivalent to each other. 42%, 42 over 100. And then if we wanted to write it as a decimal, well, what we have right here is 42 hundredths. So if I want to write 42 hundredths as a decimal, then I'm going to write 42 going to the hundredths place. And then something that's going to be really common for us to do in solving problems is going back and forth between percents and decimals. You can just kind of use this sort of image as a way to remember how to go back and forth between percents and decimals. If you have a percent, you could turn it into a fraction and then turn that into a decimal. Or what a lot of you will probably do is, well, if I'm here at 42% and I want to turn that into a decimal, what I need to do there is I need to move the decimal 2 places to the left. And now I'll have the decimal version of it. If I have a if I have a decimal and I want to rewrite that as a percent, I just need to move the decimal 2 places to the right, and that'll be 42%. Let me know if you have any questions on anything there before we look at doing some converting back and forth between percents and decimals. Okay. Converting between decimals and percents. So if we wanted to convert the decimal 0.27 to a percent, well, there's a couple ways to think of this. You might think of it as, well, to make that a percent, I just need to move the decimal point 2 places to the right, and it's 27%. Absolutely fine, good, you can certainly do that. If that's not comfortable for you, or maybe not yet, what you could do instead is look at this decimal and say, well, that's 0.27, which means it goes to the hundredths place. So as a fraction, that's 27 hundredths. And since percents mean out of 100 per 100, 27 out of 100 is going to be 27%. So either way to get there, going from a decimal to a percent, is just fine, whatever's comfortable for you. Go in the other direction, 34%, rewrite that as a decimal. Here again, we can move that decimal 2 places to the left, and as a decimal, we have 0.34. Or if you're not quite comfortable with that yet, that's okay. You could say, well, percent means out of 100, so that means 34% means 34 out of 100, and 34 hundredths as a decimal would look like this. So moving the decimal point is probably what most of you will do, but you're also free to go through the fraction to get there if that helps you. I'm going to have you try one. I'll set up a poll for this. Convert 4% to a decimal. Be a little bit careful on this one. And we're just rewriting that as a decimal. You may want to go through the fraction to get there. You may just want to move the decimal point. Be a little bit careful, though, when you do this one. Let's go another 15 seconds, and then we'll talk about it. All right, let's see what we've got. Not unanimous, but strong agreement. Let's take a look. So one way to go here is to move the decimal point 2 places. And if you do that, you have to be a little bit careful because you're moving it past what's there. And so you have this hole right here you have to fill in. We'll put a 0 there. And so we'll have 0.04 after moving the decimal point 2 places. One thing nice about percents is you can just check this by moving it back. If you move it back 2 places, now it'd be 4%. Okay, that's perfect. An easy mistake to make here is to call this 0.4. And the trouble with that is this is in the tenths place. So that would be 4 tenths. If we wrote that decimal all the way out to the hundredths place, it would be 40. And so 0.4 would be 40%. And that's not what we want for this one. One thing I do want to point out when you're writing decimals, and this may have come up before, but since we're talking about going back and forth between percents and decimals, 0.04 is fine. 0.04 is also fine. Both of those are correct. And Canvas will read them both as the same. When I write them in our class meetings, I'm going to write it this way, not because I think that's more correct. It's strictly because I don't want a little decimal point like that to get lost. Maybe you don't see the decimal point, so you're not really sure where it is. And so that's why I'm always going to write them this way. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with 0.04. Now we'll look at solving problems that involve percents. And the main thing we're going to do here is we're going to take a sentence and translate that into an equation. So it's almost like going from one language into another. We're going from English into a mathematical equation. The first problem there says, what is 56% of 310? And here's how we're going to go about that. What? Well, that's the thing I don't know, so I'll call it X. Now I have the word is. What's a good math word that means the same thing as is? Perfect, Jennifer. Shelby, you're exactly right. Equals. So is going to be equals. 56% we're going to write as a decimal of. That's the word that we got to make sure we're careful with here. Of is a word that lets us know we're going to multiply. And so where we see of, we're going to multiply. And 310, that's just 310. And now we just need to solve this equation for X, and we'll have our answer. Well, there's not really any algebra to do here. We just need to multiply 0.56 times 310. 173.6. It said round to the nearest tenth. Well, this already is. So our answer here is just 173.6. What is 56% of 310? 173.6 is 56% of 310. Let me know if you have questions on that one before we move to the one down below. We're going to use the same idea here. 22 is just a number. 22 is going to be equals. What percent? What is the thing we don't know? That's the thing we're looking for. So I'm still going to call it X. But I do want to make a little note to myself here that this question is asking me for a percent. So when I get to the end and I give my answer, I need to make sure that it's in the form of a percent. Of is still going to be multiply. And 70 is just 70. Now for this one, I do have to do a little algebra to get that X by itself. We'll divide by 70 on the right, divide by 70 on the left. These will cancel, leaving X. And now on the left-hand side, I have 22 divided by 70, whatever that is. 22 divided by 70 is going to be 0.31428. And that keeps going. I've done everything I need to do here. I turned the words into an equation. I solved it. This is where I go back and I go, okay, but wait a second. It said what percent? So I need to turn this decimal into a percent. So I'm going to move the decimal point over 2 places, and I'll have 31.428. That keeps going percent. And at this point is when I'm going to round to the nearest tenth. I'm going to make sure I've done everything else before I round. So rounding is going to be the very last thing we do. We've found the answer. We changed it to a percent. Now is when we're going to round. All right, round to the nearest tenth. So I'll find the tenths place, look 1 space to the right, that's 4 or lower. So we'll round this down to 31.4%. Do you have any questions on that before I have you try one like it? All right, here goes. 118 is what percent of 275? Round your answer to the nearest tenth. I'll make a poll for this, and you try it. So we'll start out by translating this from English into an equation. We'll solve that equation, and we want to make sure our answer is in the proper format. I didn't put percent symbols in those answers, but they are all percents. We'll go another 15 seconds, maybe 20, and then we'll talk about it. See how we did here. Unanimous, outstanding. That's fantastic news. Okay, so we'll go through this one. Let me know if you see something that you're unsure of. But what we've got here is 118 is what percent, and that's just I need to remember my answer is going to be a percent of 275. I need to get x by itself, so we'll divide by 275 on the right, divide by 275 on the left. Those cancel, leaving me just the x, which is where I was trying to go. And then I have 118 divided by 275 is 0.42909. That keeps going, but I'm not going to need anything past there. Right now, my answer is in the form of a decimal. I need it to be a percent. So I'll move that decimal over 2 places and have 42.909%. As opposed to round to the nearest tenth. So we'll go find the tenths place, look 1 space to the right, that's 4 or lower. So we'll round this down to 42.9%. So what we're saying there is 118 is 42.9% of 275. A little less than half, so that kind of makes sense. We can feel good about that answer. Continuing with the idea of percents, here's sort of a real world type of question. Yvonne spends 36% of her income on rent. If her rent costs $1,200 per month, what is her monthly income? Okay, so this is a little more involved than what we had before. We kind of have to think this through, but we're going to do the same idea. We're going to start out by taking this information we've been given here and write an equation using it. So she spends 36% of her income on rent. So we can say then that 36% of her income is rent. Okay, got it. 36% of her income is rent. If her rent is 1,200 a month, so we're going to be able to put 1,200 in here for rent. What is her monthly income? So that's what we're looking for. So we can translate this and get to 0.36 times income. What I'm looking for is the 1,200 she pays for rent. Took a little longer to put this one together. We may have to read a question like this a few times before we get to where we have an equation to solve. But now we've reached a point where we have an equation to solve, and we'll divide by 0.36 on the left, divide by 0.36 on the right. Those cancel, so x is 1,200 divided by 0.36 is 33, 33, point, whole bunch of threes. This question didn't tell us where to round. I'll do my best to make sure every question tells you where to round. But anytime a question is about money, if we have a question about money and it doesn't tell you where to round, I'm going to want you to round to the nearest cent. Your default position. I'll do my best to make sure every question is very clear and just tells you where to round. But if it doesn't, and it's about money, we're going to round to the nearest cent, which means we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So we'll go to the hundredths place for lower, so we'll round that down. Her monthly income then is $333, or $3,333.33. Let me know if you have questions about that one. All right. Sales tax. A pair of earbuds costs $24 and the sales tax rate is 8%. What's the total cost of these earbuds? So a way to approach this is to say, okay, sales tax rate is 8%, so I'll figure out how much tax there is. And the tax is going to be 8% of the $24 that the earbuds cost. And I wasn't very explicit as I wrote that out, so if you have any questions about how come you did 0.08, we just turned this 8% into a decimal. Of is multiply, and the $24 is the cost of the earbuds. So 8% of the cost, that's what we're going to pay in tax. So we'll go ahead and multiply those together. 0.08 times 24 is $1.92. Here's where you have to be a little bit careful. We kind of got in a little routine there where we would read a question, turn it into an equation to solve that equation, or in this case, simplify, and then have an answer and be done. Please be careful. Make sure you answer the question that's being asked. Because this says, what's the total cost of the earbuds? We're not done yet. We don't have that. What we just found is how much the tax is going to be. The total cost of the earbuds, though, that's going to be the cost, is going to be the $24 that the earbuds cost, plus the $1.92 in sales tax. So the cost is going to be $25.92, and that's going to be our answer to this question. Take 30 seconds and go back and reread the question and say, wait a minute, did I answer the question that I was asked? It'd be a shame to find the tax correctly and have $1.92, put that in as an answer and have it scored incorrect because that wasn't what the question was asking for. So just a little heads up to make sure you answer the question that's being asked. If this said, how much is the sales tax? $1.92 is our answer. But because it said, what's the total cost? We had a little bit more work to do. I'm going to have you try one. I don't know if y'all can see it. It hasn't loaded for me yet. Okay, there it is. A phone sells for $800, but is on sale for 30% off. What is the sale price of the phone? I'll make a poll for this one. A key here is that we're looking for the sale price. Make sure you keep that in mind as you solve it. Go another 20 seconds on this, then we'll talk through it together. All right, let's see how we did here. Unanimous. Outstanding. Very good. Even though the response is unanimous, if you see something that you're not sure of when we go through it, please don't hesitate to ask. I don't want you to feel like you can't ask questions just because a whole bunch of people answered the same way. Okay, so I want to know the sale price, but first I'm going to figure out how much the discount was. And the discount here is, well, it's 30% of that $800 cost. Oh, okay. So to find the amount of the discount, I'm going to do 0.3 times 800. That's $240. And nobody answered 240, which is excellent. Almost always somebody answers with the 240 because we found an equation, we solved that equation. Seems like we ought to be done, but we're not because this question said, what is the sale price? And so the price of the phone will be the $800 original price minus the 240 discount. It'll be $560. Let me know if you have any questions on that before we move on to markup. Outstanding. We're doing great so far. The polls have been really good. Okay. The bookstore markup on a book is 20% of the price they pay to get the book from the publisher. So just to sort of clean up that sentence a little bit and make sure it makes sense is the bookstore buys a book from a publisher at a certain price, and the bookstore needs to make a profit. So they increase the price by 20% of whatever they paid and then sell it to the customer. So that's what that first sentence means there is the markup on the book is 20% of the price they pay to get the book from the publisher. If the cost of the book at the bookstore is $65, what did the bookstore pay to the publisher? Now, this one's a little more complicated than what we've worked on so far. This one takes a little more processing, I think. You may not think it's that challenging, but I think it's more challenging than what we've done up to now. And here's a way you can approach that. What we're after is, what did the bookstore pay to the publisher? So we could call that P for price or C for cost. I think I'll just call it X. That's the thing I'm looking for, what the bookstore paid to the publisher. And then when the bookstore got it, they added 20% of that price. So they added 20% of that cost on top of it to arrive at this $65 price that they're going to sell it for. I'm going to walk back through that one more time. So the cost at the bookstore is $65. That's what they're going to sell it for. And how they arrive at that number is they take whatever it is that they paid to the publisher, we're calling that X, and then they add 20% on top of that. And it's 20% of whatever they paid. So here's whatever they paid. We're going to add 20% of whatever they paid, and that's how we're going to arrive at the $65. Let me know if there's anything in there that doesn't make sense or is challenging. Now we need to figure out how to solve this thing, but we can do that because just because we didn't write a coefficient in front of that X doesn't mean there isn't one. That's 1X. So as I look at the left-hand side of my equation, I have 1X plus 0.2X. So really what I have over there then is 1.2X is 65. And now we just need to solve this. Okay, well, that's multiplication. So I'll divide by 1.2 on the left, divide by 1.2 on the right. Those cancel. X is whatever 65 divided by 1.2 is. 54.1666666. That keeps going. This didn't tell me how to round, but since it's about money, I'm going to round to the nearest cent, which is the nearest hundredth. Look one space to the right, that's 5 or bigger. So we'll round this up. And the bookstore paid $54.17 for that book. And now they're selling it for $65. Let me know if you have questions on this before I have you try one. Outstanding. The markup on a set of tires is 18% of the price paid to get the tire from the manufacturer. If the set of tires is sold to the consumer for $875, what did the store pay to the manufacturer for those tires? I'll set up a poll for this and have you solve it. A little more challenging than what we did at the beginning. If you get an answer that's not one of the ones shown, you can pick the one that's closest to yours, and I'll know that you had enough time on it. I don't want to rush through this because I do think it's more challenging than what we've done up to this point. Things have gone really well up to this point, so I'm pretty optimistic that this is going to go well also. But I definitely want to give you a chance to try to solve it and a chance to ask questions also. How about another 15 seconds on this? Then we'll talk through it. Let's take a look. Not unanimous and not as many answers. That makes me a little nervous. If you see something in here as we solve this one that you're not sure about or is uncomfortable for you, make sure you ask. Okay, so the markup is 18% of the price paid. If they sell them for $875, what did the store pay? So what did the store pay is what we're looking for. We'll call that X. And the markup is 18%. So we're going to add on 18% of that purchase price to get our $875 selling price. Now we can add those together on the left. What we've got are like terms here. I have 1x plus 0.18x. So I wind up with 1.18x is 875. I'm sorry, Shelby. I closed that one too fast. That's my fault. But I'm glad that's the answer you got. We'll divide by 1.18 on the left, divide by 1.18 on the right. Those will cancel, and x is 875 divided by 1.18. 740 rounded to the nearest hundredth, we'll have 741.53. If anybody has questions on how we went about that, don't hesitate to ask them. The idea is whatever they paid plus 18% of whatever they paid, because that's the markup, gives us the selling price. And then we solve it. Similar to markup is markdown. A television is 15% off and the sale price is $800. Rounded to the nearest cent, what was the original price? So here we're looking for the original price, and I can see that it was marked down by 15%. So there's just going to be one change to what we did before when we go to set this one up. We're looking for the original price. We'll call it P this time, since it's the original price. We don't have to use X every single time. And then 15% off. Well, that discount that we're going to subtract from the price is going to be 15% of whatever that original price was. And that's going to give us our sale price of $800. So really, this is very similar to markup, except we're going to subtract instead of add. We're going to figure out how much we're taking off of the original price. Just like we did before, we're going to look at this and see, well, I have 1p minus 0.15p. Be careful with that. Might be worth typing in a calculator to make sure you get 0.85p is 800. And to get the original price, we'll divide both sides by 0.85. And we get P is 800 divided by 0.85. Oops. $941.18. So $941.18. And I went ahead and rounded that to the nearest cent. Let me know if you have any questions on that one. Very much like markup, except we subtract because we're marking down. Okay. Salary increase. It's a percents type of question. A television production assistant starts out making $31,000 per year. This person received a 3% raise after the first year and a 5% raise after the second year. Is their current salary the same as if they would have originally received an 8% raise? And at first glance, it's kind of like, well, I don't know, they got 3% and then they got 5%, so seems like it ought to be the same as 8%, so sure. Well, before we answer, let's do some calculations here. Let's start out with that $31,000, and they get a 3% raise. So we're going to tack on 3% on top of there. So the amount of the raise they're going to get is going to be 3% of that. That's $930. So at the end of that first year, now they're making $31,930, and they're going to get a 5% raise on top of that. So how much they're going to get in a raise is 5% of that, which is $1,596.50. And so then we'll go ahead and add these together to see what their salary is using this approach. Using that approach, their salary is now $32,596.50. All right, let's do it the other way. So doing this the other way, they started out at $31,000 and they're just going to get an 8% raise. So the amount of a raise they're going to get is $2,480. We'll add that to their original salary of $31,000, and they're making $33,480. The idea here is getting 8% is a bigger number than 3 and then 5, because we're getting the entire 8% on this 31,000, so they're not the same. They're not the same. Basically, if you ever come across a question like this, what I don't want you to do is read it and go, well, 3 and 5 is the same as 8, so sure, it's the same. Don't do it that way. Actually do the computation and figure out what it is, where it is you'll end up. All right. Anybody have any questions on anything we've talked about as far as percents go?